All right, today we are going to look at Michal, who is the wife of David and the daughter of Saul. Some people pronounce it Michal, but whichever way it is, that's who we're going to be looking at. We're going to start out in 2 Samuel. Well, actually, we're going to start out in Matthew, but Matthew 7, but we'll go through that fairly quickly. And then we will go to 2 Samuel 5, 17 through 25. And then we will go to 2 Samuel chapter 6. We start out with Michal, and it's entitled The Judgmental. And we know that people can be judgmental. We know that Christians are accused of being judgmental because of some of the beliefs we hold. So we want to look at her judgmental and how hers was not what judgment should be. And we always hear Matthew 7:1. Anybody who may be an atheist knows this one. Do not judge or you will be judged. And what does that mean? Does that mean we don't judge? And of course, they don't read on. The rest of what Jesus says is basically do it for the right reasons, with the right heart. Make sure you're not trying to tell somebody who's got a minor problem, a speck in his eye, and you've got a beam in your eye. We've got to make sure that we do it, and we do it for the right reasons. All of us in this room have met and maybe have dealt with people who are judgmental. You do it right, and they will say, what you could have done is add something to it, or nothing is ever right. The singing was bad today. The sermon was bad. The serving the communion. Now, if the serving of the communion is bad, it's your own fault because you're supposed to. We don't have the serving. We do have the comments and the scripture, but some people will find just anything to criticize and be judgmental about.
Those are the people you don't want to go to lunch with. Promise. Everything wrong.
Yeah. I'll go to lunch with them, but I'll sit over there. We're done. And I'll even pick up the tab. It's just, all right, never mind. But he goes on here and says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye? Then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. In other words, what we've got here is you've got this beam in your own eye. Be sure to get that out first. Secondly, do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls before pigs. Now, in the Jewish world, that meant a lot because dogs today, in some households, rank above the family. All right, I witnessed when I was in Reno, we had one of these animal emergency rooms, and here they came, and they came out with the gurney, and they put the dog on the gurney, and they rush it in there. It looked like General Hospital. But dogs in that day, they were scavengers. They were mongrels, basically. And of course, we know pigs are considered very unclean and to Jews, and therefore we don't do that. And then watch out for false prophets. What if somebody teaches something that's not correct? Are we don't judge because we don't want to be judged, or do we take it up? And there are ways of doing it. We had some visitors when I was growing up in the church I was in, and the singing was not that good because small congregations, it's not going to be that good. And one of the visitors just said, this is the worst singing I've ever heard. And she told the song leader, you need to learn how to lead the singing. And the song leader was also the preacher. Well, we were happy to have her visit, and I hope she contributed to get out. That was total. It was unnecessary. What was gained? We know that. We know the singing is not that good. Because, sister, we've been here every week, not just this week. So we know it. All right, but anyway, Now let's look now at 2 Samuel 5:17-25. The reason I'm going there, rather than right to the Michal or Michal part of it, is to show there's another story within the story, and there's another lesson within the lesson. What we have here is David defeats the Philistines. He had, at this point, he had become king. He was over all the 12 tribes, and they all recognized him as king. And God was with David, and the Jebusites even, and David had conquered Jerusalem. And the Jebusites, remember what they said leading into this? They bragged that David would not get into Jerusalem. The blind and the lame would defeat David and his troops. Be careful what you say, because as the old saying goes, you may eat those words. And in fact, they did. Everything went well. Now, what he had done is he had moved his, the government is now moved to Jerusalem. And we're going to see in chapter 6 then, what did he want to move? The ark. Let's watch what he does when he defeats the Philistines. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, they went up in full force to search for him. But David heard about it and went down to the stronghold. Now the Philistines had come and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. So David inquired of the Lord. That's very important, isn't it? Inquire of the Lord. Shall I go and attack the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hands? The Lord answered him, Go, for I will surely deliver the Philistine into your hands. So David went to Baal Perazim, and there defeated them. He said, As waters break out, the Lord has broken out against my enemies before me. Why was he successful?
He inquired of the Lord.
He inquired of the Lord. Because we're going to see with this little ark transfer, things went awry. We all know that story, but we will get to it in a moment. So that place was called Baal Perazim. The Philistines abandoned their idols there. Once again, we've got the idol problem that will exist. It's going to continue throughout the history of the Old Testament. They abandoned their idols there, and David and his men carried them off. And they did not carry them off so that they could put them up where they wanted them. They carried them off to get rid of them and destroy them. And that was another thing that David did that was correct, that kept him as a man after God's own heart. Once more, well, the Philistines don't give up. That's the nature of the Philistines. They don't give up. Once more, the Philistines came up and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. So David inquired of the Lord, and he answered, the Lord says, do not go straight up, but circle around behind them. Now there we have one of the oldest tactics in military warfare, is to get behind your enemy. Well, what he did, and he said, and attack them in front of the poplar trees. As soon as you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the poplar trees, move quickly, because that will mean the Lord has gone out in front of you to strike the Philistine army. So who's going to strike the Philistine army?
The Lord.
The Lord. And what did David do? He did exactly what he did, what he had been told. So David did as the Lord commanded him. And he struck down the Philistines all the way to Gibeon. All the way from Gibeon to Gezer. Success. He had success. Now let's go back to last week very quickly, and we didn't get a chance to talk about this last week. But one of the things that the Israelites did after being told that now you're not going to wander in the desert for 40 years because of the way you've reacted to my giving you the promised land. Well, they woke up the next morning after they got dressed down and after they wailed and cried. They woke up the next morning, we're ready to go. And what happened? They went, and what was the result? They got back out of there in a hurry Because remember, God had said earlier, because you're stiff-necked, I'm not going to be with you. But they ignored that. I'm going to go anyway. All right. So now we see how it's done when it's done correctly. Now, let's go to chapter 6. This is right after this, by the way, in case you can't find it. All right. I get lost in the Old Testament. So that's why I always have to use these little helpful things to remember how to get there. All right, now what we have is beginning of verse 1 in chapter 6, because we're going to cover the whole chapter. The intentions of David are good. He wants to move the ark from where it is to Jerusalem. The government of Israel in the form of the king and all what that amounts to is in Jerusalem now. So he wants to bring the king, God the king, to Jerusalem in the form of the ark. So the idea is good. So what happens? He inquires of the Lord, right? No. David again brought together all the able young men of Israel, and there were 30,000 of them. He and all his men went to Bahalah in Judah to bring from there the ark of God, which is called by the name. Right? So he's ready to go there. He's got the 30,000. He's got the plan all out. The name of the Lord Almighty, who was enthroned between the cherubim on the ark. Now, what did they do? Who's supposed to transport the ark? The priests. How are they supposed to transport it?
Carry it.
Carry it with the little poles through the things on the rings on the side of it. So what did he do? Well, to his credit, he went to Home Depot, got a new cart, and was going to carry it on a new cart, not the way it was supposed to be carried. Now, what's interesting is, and I have to say, poor Uzzah. You know, here's a guy who had good intentions, but ended up, but he becomes the victim of what David is doing here and doing it wrong. All right. So they set the ark of God on the new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Now that's always a bad thing. When you have to go downhill with something, the whole thing can literally go downhill and figuratively go downhill. So here we are. Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart. And neither one of them is a priest. So there, we've got everything out of the way it's supposed to be done. And the new cart with the ark of God on it. And Ahio was walking in front of it. David and all Israel were celebrating with all their might. And we can stop there. You can see David is sincere about what he's doing. This is not something like the Israelites have done earlier we talked about, where we're going in to conquer that land now. After whining and crying and saying we want to get rid of Moses, we want to go back to Egypt, we want to go back to slavery, that was so much fun, I guess. I don't know, I wouldn't think so. I'm sure Pharaoh was not interested in having them come back. But here David really has his heart right, but he forgets. He forgets what to do. So, and he's doing this. I love this when it says, David and all of Israel were celebrating with all their might. Remember, when we studied last quarter, we didn't do, I was not in this class. I was in the little house on the prairie. Out in the foyer, they have a little lean-to there where we were allowed to meet. And I just used that. Oh, well, I can't really tell you why I do it, but anyway, we studied about Paul. When Paul was Saul, he was all in to persecuting those of the way. He knew in his heart of hearts he was right. He knew that he was serving God as a Pharisee by doing what he did. And here we have, he did everything with all his might. And then after Damascus, and he became Paul, and was now the instrument or the ambassador to the Gentiles. He took all of that exciting, with all his might, and did it just the opposite. Then he was preaching the gospel to the Gentiles. So he was all in for what he was all in for. And David was the same way. Here's David, just all in on this. Before the Lord with the castanets, the harps, the lyres, the timbrels, the sistrums, and the cymbals. I mean, this was a very impressive ceremony, except it started out wrong and didn't get better. Now, David later admits that he should have asked God how to carry the ark, and that's found in 1 Chronicles 15:13. He admits that I did it wrong. And that's good too. Learn from our mistakes. And of course, we know what insanity is if we make the same mistake, trying to get this different results, and we keep doing it over and over again. Hey, excuse me. But he understood now. But they're celebrating with songs here. When they came to the threshing floor at Nacon, here's poor Uzzah, reached out and took hold of the ark of God because the oxen stumbled.
More than likely, it's just a natural reaction to try to stay on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How many in this room would probably have done exactly the same thing? Because to us, well, to them, not to us now, but to them then, that ark was secret. And it could ride on a new cart, but it couldn't fall off. We don't want that to happen. We don't want that to happen. So, I'm sorry.
Just to go back just a little bit when we're talking about Saul, I've always wondered when he went on his journey of persecution, did he pray to the Lord for good results in his mind? And if would he have been told?
Well, remember, he wanted to go certain places, and the Spirit told him not to go.
No, I'm talking about after, before he was
Well, and
had he prayed to the Lord, because what we know the end of the story and we know why it happened the way it happened. But had he prayed to the Lord for
guidance and
guidance
strength.
in this,
We don't know.
what would God have said? And that, like you're talking about, sometimes we do things wrong with the best of intentions. And I know why you can see in the end why God chose Saul, because the total reverse, the 180-degree turn in his life, and he had such fervor. You see why that happened, but did he petition the Lord for? You just wonder.
Yeah, and I've got the answer to that.
Okay.
Deuteronomy 29:29. If you've ever read that, it basically says the things of the Lord belong to the Lord. There are things we don't know. We don't. And the other thing too, to carry what you're saying there a little bit farther, he also signed off on people being killed. Look at Stephen. Now, after Stephen was stoned to death, did Saul pray and say, thank you, God? That's a good question.
And I've always wondered when the Israelites conquer a nation and destroy everything, man, woman, and child. That's one of the hardest things for me. And the only way I could justify it is like when I was a little boy and had toy soldiers. I own those soldiers. Like God made those people. He can do what he wants to, and you just have to wonder about it, especially in little children. Because I think I know what their situation is after that. I do.
And that's also true. They are not, I mean,
it's a horrible way to go to be with the Lord.
yes, it is. It is. But they are.
Especially when you have no control, very little control over your life to begin with. Those have always been paradoxical things.
Yeah. And then, when Uzzah is struck dead, the Lord's anger burned against Uzzah. Now, do we think that Uzzah did this to get God angry? And the answer is no. I doubt he even thought about it. It was just, as you said, it was a reaction to keep that ark from falling off the new cart from Home Depot.
Yeah, and those are especially, you'll be in those places, if somebody almost trips, the first thing is to reach out to them.
Yeah.
Or somebody tries to bring something off the shelf. Of course, I'm in there all the time.
Yeah, you are.
People try to bring something down off the shelf, and it looks like it's gonna fall and hit them in the head, you want
Yeah, you want to help.
just a gut reaction.
And then sometimes, your child runs out in front of the car, you run out after it.
Right.
So, yeah, some of these things are not, all right, now here's what I'm going to do today. If that ark comes off the new cart, I'm going to steady it. He didn't think about that. I'm sure he didn't. Now, the Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Do you think Uzzah viewed what he did as irreverent?
No.
If we had been able to stop it, hit the pause button and say, hey, Uzzah, this is irreverent, he probably, what? He had his heart in the right place. Now, therefore, God struck him down and he died there beside the ark of God. Now, we have had situations where people have repented before they are killed. What about Uzzah? I mean, this sounds like,
those paradoxes.
yeah, it's one of these things where it sounds like it was not, oh, forgive me, Father, for I've sinned, and then boom, this is touch, zap, and he's gone. And then there's another one, we'll go down this road, it has nothing to do with this. But remember, there was one of the great leaders promised God that if something happened, he would kill the next thing that came out of the door of his house. Not realizing who was coming out of the door of the house.
His daughter.
His daughter, and only daughter, only child. I mean, whoa, that's tough. I think always think of God as being so loving. He is. But there are certain things that he demands. And there are consequences for making them, God, if you do this, if you help me beat this enemy, I think it was, I will kill the first thing that comes out the door of my house.
And I always wonder what the daughter's mindset was. All of a sudden, she's gonna be killed.
Yeah.
I
Honey,
would think terrible.
honey, you don't have to worry about the prom this year. Yeah, 'cause you
That
won't
was a
be
harsh
here.
lesson, though. It was a harsh lesson, though, to teach him, don't make foolish promises. That's basically what he did. He made a foolish promise.
And it also teaches us too.
Yeah.
Ours are not quite so immediate. And in fact, when we discussed that in a class about 5 or 6 years ago, one of the members in that class got very emotional and said, that's not my God. My God would not have done that.
But God is just.
Yeah, but you got it in scripture, so how do we get around it? Because if that part of scripture is not true, then what else is not true? Okay, so anyway, we're way off the road there, I'm sorry. We not only fell off the new cart, but we rolled down that hill into the threshing floor on that one. And then what's David's reaction?
He was angry.
He's angry. David was angry because the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzzah. And to that day, that place is called Perez Uzzah, which is outbreak against Uzzah. So David gets upset. Would that be, let's put ourselves in David's place, would that be our reaction? Probably would be. To be angry. Even though we know David is a man after God's own heart. But does that mean he never gets angry?
Oh, he's still human.
Yeah, he is still human.
Maybe David was sort of mad at himself too, because he
maybe he, like you said, he realizes later that he did it wrong. So
Yeah, that's a very good point.
it's like, it's my fault this man's dead.
Yes, yes. And so from now on, if you have a choice, always walk in front of the ark. Because Ohio survived it. Don't walk beside it. Oh, that's bad. That's very irreverent. I'm going to get struck down. Then David was angry, as we said, but at verse 9, at the same time of his anger, or shortly thereafter, David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, how can the ark of the Lord ever come to me? Now that question, that's kind of an interesting question. We realize that David is doing this because he wants God to be the center of attention in Jerusalem. Not David as the king and all the royal trappings that go along with that. We'll talk about those in just a minute. But you look at this and it kind of sounds like it's more about him in a way than it is about God. How is it ever going to come to me? And then it continues, he was not willing to take the ark of the Lord to be with him in the city of David. That's a good result. He certainly learned from a very tough lesson, not as tough as it was on us, but he learned a lesson here. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for 3 months, and the Lord blessed him and his entire household. Well, there is, he did the right thing, did David. And what did God do? God did not necessarily bless David. He blessed the family of the household of those who had it in their care, had the ark in their care. Now, at verse 12, King David was told, the Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and everything he has because of the ark of God. So, David now, he might see this as, all right, we're back in good graces with God. I mean, we saw the touching of the ark, which was wrong, clearly wrong. That resulted in death, and that was the punishment. I mean, that was what they knew would happen. But anyway, he said then, so David went to bring up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. So he may have been a little bit put out by the fact that Obed-Edom got, and his household got these blessings, but I don't think so. I think if he was, he got over it because he is now rejoicing. When those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf. How is the ark being carried at this point? It doesn't say, we can infer.
No, this time it's being carried. It's not being wheeled up.
Yes, not being wheeled. It's not the old, I don't know if Obed-Edom kept the new cart or whether he burned the thing, but they are carrying it appropriately. And as a result, when they take 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fatted calf. Now there are some commentaries, and just like we do in this class, and I hope we do, we comment on these things, and we ask questions to which we can't say, oh, the answer is. It's one of those things where it's a very good point, and we can talk about it. Well, some of the commentators, if you're ready, have said that every 6 steps he did this. If that were true, David would probably still be bringing the ark from where it was to the city of David. But what did he do? He recognized reverence for God, that this was a religious matter here. It wasn't just bringing the ark down and put it up over here in the tent of meeting, which is where it went. It was not just that. It was a he treated it with reverential things, and he sacrificed a bull and a fatted calf. Now, this is where we get into, now we're eventually going to get to the main part of the lesson. Even if we have to stay till noon, we'll get to it. just be patient. So I told Dewey one time, Dewey, you pray for patience, right? He said, yeah. I said, well, I'm your answer to your prayer. So I said that once again. He said, I don't pray for patience anymore. Okay. Now, he brings it, takes the 6 steps. He's wearing a linen ephod. And there, again, there's some commentaries on that as to what a linen ephod was. It was something the priests wore. And some say it was kind of like an apron. Others say it was kind of like wrapped around him, but that's all he was wearing. Okay, and that becomes important in a minute. Okay, he's wearing that, and what is he doing? He is dancing before the Lord with all his might. I mean, he was into this dancing. And you can imagine if the ephod is just kind of covering in front. Let your imagination be your guide on what might have been showing during his dancing with all his might, because he was moving around. And I'm sure the ephod was, all right. You can check it, it's on YouTube, what it looked like. All this might. While he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and sound of trumpets. Now notice it didn't have all the other things. It had the trumpets, and the trumpets are important, an important symbol there. So he is excited about this. He is into it. And as king, instead of doing what a king may do,
Would be a solemn movement.
Solemn movement in his robes and with his crown,
Right.
and all of his all the trappings that he has. Wasn't that, was it? As the let's also do this real quickly. I want to get a kind of a background on Michal before we go to the next verse there, chapter 16. Okay. Let's see here. All right, now what we know about Michal is she is the second daughter of Saul. And her relationship with David began as David entered into King Saul's service as sort of his poet laureate, if you might say. He plays the harp and he tries to calm Saul down. We know that David was also an officer in the army, and that led to some friction between him and Saul. None of David's doing, but the people thought more of David's military conquest than they did of King Saul's. The king had offered his oldest daughter, Merab, to David to be his wife. In return, Saul expected David's loyalty in fighting the king's battles against the Philistines. Saul's intention had not been to honor David, though. This was basically, remember we talked about Saul being paranoid? And he showed his paranoia on a number of occasions. He was concerned about David. David was a rival in his mind. Saul had become jealous of David's success and popularity among the people. Saul said to himself, I will not raise a hand against him. I will let the Philistines do that. That's in 1 Samuel 18:17. Well, David refused Saul's gift. But then there was Saul's daughter, Michal. She was in love with David, and when they told Saul about it, he was pleased. Mind is working. That little paranoid mind is working. I will give her to him, he thought, so that she may be a snare to him. Oops. That's interesting. And so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. This is 1 Samuel 18:20-21. And now finally, with some coaxing by Saul's attendants, David accepted Michal as his wife. And the marriage, though, did nothing to help ease Saul's paranoia. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and his daughter Michal, and his daughter Michal loved David, Saul became more afraid of him, and he remained his enemy for the rest of his days. That's 1 Samuel 18:28-29. And in this jealousy, there were times that Saul ordered David's assassination. He wanted to get rid of him that way. But initially what he was trying to do was let the women do it and let the Philistines do it. All right, so as we go here now, as the ark was entering the city of David, it was late in the day, so we better move along. Michal, daughter of Saul, and of course, we said wife of David, watched from a window. She was not part of this. This was below her dignity, I believe. As she says, and when she saw the king leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. Well, that's pretty rough. That is pretty rough. That is very judgmental. Because what is she saying? This is despicable conduct. That's why I despise what he's doing. And then they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. So David is treating this as reverentially as what it is. It is moving God into the tent of meeting.
Well, by despising David at the time, she also despised what he was doing, which was for the Lord. I mean, it was almost a, an assault against the Lord because of how she thought.
And it also demonstrates the difference between what David's reverence for the Lord and I think Michal's no reverence for the Lord. I don't think she's into this at all. She's into being queen, oh yeah. She's into all the fancy trappings that involves, but not as far as the worship of Yahweh.
He wasn't practicing royalty in her mind.
No.
And royalty was something that was very important to her. So she felt like he was humbling himself or even being pretty bold in what he was doing as far as his dress and everything. But, the thing is, the Lord says that a woman is to honor her husband. And she showed great dishonor in him instead of, she could have disagreed with him and said it nicely, but she despised him in her heart, it says. So that wasn't the way to handle it. And God was very unpleased with that because she remained barren for the rest of her life.
That's exactly right. So we see the two differences there in the relationship with God. And then David gave a loaf of bread and a cake of dates and a cake of raisins to each person and the whole crowd of the Israelites. The bakers must have been up early that morning to get all that baked. Both men and women. And then all the people went to their homes. Now David returns home. When David returned home to bless his household, that's what he was doing. He was going to bless. Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, and you can just see this, how she says it, like this, how the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, going around half naked in full view of the slave girls of his servants as any vulgar fellow would. You can just see that. She's just frothing at the mouth about this. And that's why we believe that ephod was probably the one that exposed him more, because he was not wearing his royal clothes. And then, isn't it interesting, she picks out full view of who? The lowest of the low. This is not the servants. These are the slave girls of the servants. So not only is he doing it in front of the servants, but he's doing it even more basic than that. And some of the translations translate the word any vulgar fellow as foolish, base, worthless. Some of them that get a little more modern and don't really translate from the Hebrew, say a burlesque street dancer. That's kind of nice, isn't it? Hey, David, king, you're a burlesque street dancer. And we won't go any farther on that. Or, and this is the one I really love, a dirty old man. That is very, to say, but the word vulgar, obviously, and she basically despised him in her heart, and then calls him vulgar. And another thing we have to remember is David is not a descendant of Saul. And that's very important, because Saul thought his descendant should become the king. And there was no tradition for that, because it was the first time the Israelites had a king. So God chose David and anointed him. Now from then, of course, Solomon and it goes on like that. But we know, because David was very important, because Jesus was going to come from the lineage of David. Well, in order to do that, David had to be the king there, right? David said to Michal, this is good to know, he gets the last word. It was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father. That's a double punch to the gut. Or anyone from his house when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. There you go. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor. Now he spelled it out right there. This is for God, not for you. And I think what we've noticed here very quickly, because we are out of time, is Michal had no clue what a relationship with God was. Her only concern was the royal family, or the royalty, the human royal side of being married to David, not what David was doing for God. And probably if we could go back in time and ask her, what does the Ark of God represent? She probably did not know. Any comments on that? I realize any comments you make after the bell rings means you're holding the students. No, any other comments? Any other comments that you want to make, please? Thank you so much. Thank you so much.